It kind of feels like we've known about Altergeist Pookuery for quite a while because it was featured in the anime several months ago, and I remember when I made that video on the Link 4 Altergeist card, I believe I mentioned at the end that I thought that because that Link 4 Altergeist was coming out, it would mean that all the other anime support would as well. It looks like that is coming true, so there still are a couple other anime exclusive Altergeist cards, but this is like the biggest one. This is a huge deal for Altergeist, and in today's video, because you guys have requested it a lot in the live streams that I've done recently, as well as the comment section on yesterday's video, I'm going to review this card from the perspective of someone that actually plays Altergeist, not someone that doesn't really know how the deck works, so hopefully you guys can gain some information from this video that you might not find on other reviews. I do want to mention here that the good news is that this card is insanely powerful, and I can't wait to get it in the TCG. The bad news is that we have no clue when this is coming out. This is in Premium Pack 2020 for the OCG, and keep in mind here that in the past, some of the Premium Pack cards have made their way into Battles of Legend. Some of them, though, we had to wait a long time for them, and some of them we don't even have right now. Like if you go back to Premium Pack 2019, a lot of those cards have still not made it into the TCG, so we really have no idea when we'll actually be able to play with this card. That being said, I really do hope Konami gives us this card before Master Rule 5, maybe even before the NAWCQ. That would be a huge deal. There are so many cool interactions with this card and cool combos with this card that I really want to play in Altergeist before the next Master Rule. That would be my ideal situation. Oh, and before we read this card's effect, I do want to point out this card does have a pretty big difference in one of the effects from the anime version. In the anime, I believe that the first effect is a once per turn and the second effect is a once per duel. With the actual card that is getting printed, to balance it, they made both effects once per duel. So you can only use the in-hand effect once and the graveyard effect one time that entire game. So what does this thing do? Well, it is a dark level 1 spellcaster monster with 300 attack and 100 defense, and it says if an Altergeist monster you control would be used as link material for an Altergeist monster, this card in your hand can also be used as material. If an Altergeist link monster is link summoned to your field while this card is in your graveyard, you can add this card to your hand, and then like I said, both of those effects are once per duel. When I first saw this card, I had one big question. I wondered if you could use that in-hand effect when you only controlled one Altergeist monster. Luckily, a couple of you guys actually helped me out, and there's a card out there called Microcoder that has the exact same text as this card, and in fact you can use it if you only control one monster. So that ruling is set in stone for right now. Maybe it'll change when it comes to TCG. Probably not though, because Microcoder has the same text and works if you only control one monster, so no worries about that. Oh, and I might as well address the surface level sort of generic really good combo with this card that I'm sure you guys have already heard discussed, but just in case you haven't, if you open this card and Moleseek, you just do something absolutely insane, really. So you can summon the Moleseek and then you can make a Hexia using that guy in your hand, and what's especially cool about this is that you can use the Moleseek as Chainlink 1 and the graveyard effect to add this back to your hand as Chainlink 2. That prevents your opponent stopping you with like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, and that opening is truly insane. Making Hexia on turn 1 is very difficult to do in Altergeist. You can play 1 for 1, and sometimes you can sack your way into that combo that makes Hexia. Sometimes people played in the past like Temple of the Kings. If you open Multifaker and Temple and a trap card, you can do some pretty insane things. But as far as actual Altergeist strategies go, you really can't depend on making Hexia on your first turn in most normal circumstances. And that combo is fantastic. It's really cool. I like it a lot. However, I do want to mention here, whenever we're reviewing cards, we don't just want to look at optimal scenarios. If you're opening Moleseek in an Altergeist deck going first, your hand is already good. I think most people know that. And while that combo is very strong, I think where this card really shines is in the regular hands that you tend to draw in Altergeist. For example, if you open this in Marionetter, that's almost just as good as opening the Moleseek. It might even be better in some scenarios. What's really cool about this is that anytime you open this card and a protocol and an Altergeist monster, or like a Marionetter to set the protocol, you still have access to that Multifaker because you can protocol to tribute the Hexia and then search the Faker, activate another trap card, then summon the Faker from your hand. That is really strong and just ups your consistency in the early game. One of the biggest weaknesses of Altergeist has always been their turn 1 board. It is very dependent on what you actually draw. You don't have a lot of searching power, a lot of really big special summon effects on the first turn. What this means though with this new card is that you have a lot more control. You can make that Hexia turn 1 almost every time, and it makes protocol so much better that I'd almost consider playing 3 copies in my Altergeist deck. I'm not sure if it's actually viable yet, but I definitely have thought of a couple different builds with this card. Some that just play 2 copies in addition to the normal Altergeist cards, some though that played 3 copies and 3 protocols protocol just to turbo out that Hextia. Also keep in mind that because this is an Altergeist card, I mean this is kind of obvious, but just so you guys know, you can shuffle this back with personal spoofing. I know it might seem scary that both of the effects are once per duel, especially if you want to play more than one copy just to see in your opening hand, but please keep in mind that every single Altergeist card at least has some value because you can always shuffle it back for the Marionetter or the Multi-Faker or whatever you need for that situation. Because we have no idea when this card is actually going to make it into the TCG, it's really hard for me right now to make any decklist recommendations. I'm not sure if 2 or 3 copies or maybe even just 1 copy is going to be the optimal way to play this card. Who really knows? If this card comes out in like a year from now, you might not even want to play Altergeist at all, but if it comes out in the next like 6 or so months, it will be very viable in most Altergeist decklists. At the very least, I would imagine as a 2 of, maybe even a 3 of. What's really cool though is that there is another card, and once again I have to give a shout out to you guys because I did not know this card existed, but this makes this even better. This card is called Linkross and it comes out in Eternity Code. Now what is Eternity Code? Well, it is the set after Ignition Assault. It is the last core set before the WCQ season, the last core set of Master Rule 4, and this card is very, very valuable in those combos I was already talking about. This is a Link 1 monster and it has a interesting effect. It says if this card is Link summoned, you can special summon Link tokens equal to the Link rating of the material used for this card's Link summon. Also, you cannot use Link tokens as Link material for the rest of this turn. That's a hard once per turn, but that part doesn't really matter. What matters about this card is its material. It takes 1 Link 2 or higher monster. The goal here, if you remember that combo that I just said, is that if you open that Hexia combo, if you don't open the Mulseek, but you really want to search that Faker turn 1, you can just put this on top of that Hexia and search the Multi-Faker immediately. You get a couple tokens, you can't really do anything with them, that's not really what's important. What's important is that you have the option, if you play this card in your extra deck with that new card, you now can always search that Multi-Faker turn 1 anytime you open that new card and an Altergeist monster. You don't even have to open the protocol, you just have to have access to Hexia. Keep in mind here that while Premium Pack 2020 actually technically is given away later in just a couple weeks, the true like on sale date of this set is not going to be until later in February of 2020. What this means, if you look at the sort of list here, if you look at Ignition Assault's release date in the TCG, it means that Altergeist Pookuery almost certainly will come out at the same time, maybe, but probably after Linkross. In other words, if you're playing Altergeist and you have access to Altergeist Pookuery in the TCG, it is very, very likely, almost 100% likely, that you are also going to have access to Linkross, which means that all those combos that I just mentioned with this card, mainly just sending the Hextia to the graveyard turn 1, are almost always going to be available to someone playing with the Pookuery in the TCG. Oh, and I suppose, just so I don't have to make another video, maybe we should talk about the third card that I believe was in the same episode as the Link 4 and Pookuery. So while we do not have official confirmation that this card will be in the Premium Pack 20 for OCG, I think the chances are pretty darn high just considering the other 2 cards from that exact same episode both were announced for that pack. But I'll still review it, and it's not really worth discussing in its own video because to be completely honest, this card is not very good. So this is a level 4 water Altergeist monster and it's a spellcaster. It has 1400 attack and 1200 defense. So this card says if an Altergeist Link monster is Link summoned to your field while this card is in your hand, you can target 1 other Link monster on the field, special summon this card to your zone that monster points to. While on the field here, you can target 1 Link monster you control. While this card is face up on the field, that monster is also treated as an Altergeist monster. You can only use each effect of this card once per turn. And I wouldn't imagine that either of these effects would be switched to once per duel, like in the case of Pookuery, just because these effects aren't very powerful. So what are you supposed to use this for? I mean, there are a couple of uses for it, and I think the biggest use is that when you crack down something, sometimes it can be kind of awkward to get it off the field because it's not an Altergeist monster. But if you like crack down something, you can now change it to an Altergeist monster, maybe turn it into a Hexia or a Prime Banshee or something along those lines, maybe even the new Link 4 monster. And while I see where Konami is coming from, I'm sure this was used in like a really specific way in the anime, but as far as the TCG goes, I mean, this card requires way too much setup. It really does for a very small minor effect. I mean, it's cool changing the name of a card to an Altergeist card, but does that really matter in the grand scheme of things? Not really, and this card is really bad turn 1. It's pretty bad even turn 2 and turn 3. 3, this requires a lot of setup, because not only do you have to summon an Altergeist Link monster, that part isn't too difficult, but you also have to have another Link monster on the field, either your field or your opponent's field, where you can actually summon this thing, because it needs to summon to where a thing points to, but not the Altergeist monster that you summon to trigger its in-hand effect. In fact, it sort of seems like this is the opposite of Pookuery. You know, Pookuery is a card that helps your turn 1 play and your turn 2 plays. This is a card that's only good like turn 3 and higher, and even then you have to already be pretty much in a winning position. I feel like this card is win more in most cases, and I don't really like those types of cards in decks like Altergeist. Oftentimes with Altergeist, you need to have every card in your hand be as alive as possible on turn 1, and this card just isn't it. Yes, the same thing applies here, where you can shuffle it back with spoofing, but there are plenty of other good choices. I would max out my copies of Pookuery before I'd even consider playing one copy of this card. Anyway though, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's discussion video, mostly focusing on this really good level 1 monster, but I also want to just throw on this level 4 monster because I'm sure I'll get some questions about it, and I'm pretty sure within the next couple days or couple weeks here, that card actually will get announced for Premium Pack 20, and I didn't want to make an entire video about it because the card isn't very good. Anyway though, I'll see you later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.